What's going on, football fans? It's time once again for another edition of the Falcon Eye View. I'm your host, J.R. Clark, and today we're going to be talking about the fifth round picks by the Atlanta Falcons in the 2017 NFL Draft. So let's jump right into it, huh? Okay, with the number 149, the 149th pick overall in the NFL Draft, the Atlanta Falcons selected cornerback Damontae Kazee out of San Diego State. Now, he's a really interesting prospect in the sense that in college he had 17 interceptions, and he holds the record at San Diego State for the amount of interceptions that he's had. So that right there lets you know that, he is a ball hawk in all sense of the word. Now, you got to ask yourself, well, how does a dude like this fit in with our, secondary, with our core that we have? And, with the likes of Desmond Trufant and Robert Alford and Jalen Collins and even undrafted rookie Brian Poole, how does this guy fit in? And do we really need another defensive back? Well, you can probably never have too many defensive backs because, the old saying goes, you can't pay them all. And we've already paid, Robert Alford and Desmond Trufant. So, who knows if we're going to end up keeping Jalen Collins in the long run or whatnot. But the interesting part with Kazee is that, he was told pretty early on that, the Falcons are going to try him out at free safety and at nickel corner. So that's interesting to me because, obviously our returning starter at free safety is Ricardo Allen, who is another converted cornerback, but he's a holdover from the previous regime and, was actually cut by the previous regime and then placed on the practice squad. It was Dan Quinn's decision to convert him to a safety. And he's played well. He hasn't necessarily lit the league on fire. He's sometimes been known to take some bad angles or whatever, but for the most part, he's done an okay job. But with that being said, he's coming up in free agency, next year, I believe. And as of right now, he still hasn't signed his tender for this year. So, that's something else to keep in mind. So, depending on how this kid Kazee comes in and plays, he could potentially take the starting job. I don't see him taking the starting job, but it all depends on, what happens with Ricardo Allen's contract situation, if he does end up signing that tender or, whatnot. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. But Kazee, watching a handful of his, games on YouTube, like I try to do, he's a really intriguing player. He's very aggressive in his play style. I've seen him get beat a few times because of it, but for the most part, he flies to the ball. Now, obviously, his ball hawking skills are on display with those 17 interceptions, which is really eye-popping. A lot of the draftniks had a, fourth-round grade on him, maybe even a third-round grade on by some, but, we got him in the fifth, so, there's some good value there as far as that goes. So depending on what he does in camp and things like that, he could, potentially be, at worst, he could potentially be nickel corner because they're also going to be auditioning Brian Poole at free safety. So it's apparent that they're not really set, so to speak, at free safety, and they at least want some competition, if not depth. So that's going to be a camp battle to keep an eye on going into the summer, as what shakes out with that. All right, so moving right along, we're going to go to pick number 156 in the fifth round, which is another somewhat interesting pick with Brian Hill, the running back out of Wyoming. I've watched his games, and he's that running back that had just been 10, 15 years ago, he would have been tabbed as a workhorse running back. He's amassed, 1,800 rushing yards and, 22 touchdowns this past season with, another 1,600 rushing yards the season before. So, it's got production. There's no doubt there. But standing, 6'1", 219, he adds a little bit more of a physical downhill style. That just I'm going to pound you, pound you and pound you until third, fourth quarter when you're tired of tackling me. That's when I'm really going to start to show up. I expect him to add a little bit of muscle. Maybe not necessarily this off season, but going forward. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's playing at like 225 ish type weight. Add a little bit of muscle behind him. I see him, at least this year, taking Teron Ward's spot. I don't see them. I mean, I'm pretty sure he could probably, beat out Teron Ward because I don't believe Teron Ward plays on special teams. So if Teron Ward doesn't play on special teams, and this kid comes in and shows he's got a willingness and a knack to play special teams, then that kind of cements his roster spot right there. So, but I really, view Brian Hill as, a potential replacement for Tevin Coleman down the line. Not saying that we need to replace Tevin Coleman, mind you, but, there is a business side of this. And like I said earlier with Damontae Kazee, you can't pay them all, And if they're dead set on paying Freeman, which it sounds like they are. I mean, even Dimitrov come out today and said, they see Devontae Freeman as a, Falcon for a long time. With that being said, Arthur Blanks, echoed those same sentiments that he wants to see, Freeman, be in the red and black for his career. So with that being said, you can't pay, 2-star running backs. I'm not saying that Tevin Coleman is necessarily a star running back, but I'm pretty sure he sees himself as one. I mean, especially with his improved receiving skills and that speed, he's definitely a if nothing else, definitely a good complementary piece to a backfield. So depending on what kind of money he commands in the coming years, this Brian Hill kid could be, a long-term backup plan for, Tevin Coleman. Now, don't get me wrong. Brian Hill ain't got the speed that Coleman's got. But then again, neither does Devontae. Devontae doesn't have the speed that Tevin Coleman's got. Devontae wins with that elusiveness and that cut, that cut that'll break your ankles. And I think, Brian Hill could win with the just power, So with that being said, I tried to find it before I recorded this podcast to see who said it. But initially there was talks about, potentially making Brian Hill a fullback or at least a lead blocker. But I don't he says nobody's talked to him about that. And I don't see them making him, a fullback or asking him to be a fullback. I mean, he might do it on occasion just to kind of throw some people off, but I don't see that being his role, in this offense. So I think, like I said, I think early on he's going to be a special teamer and, potentially a short yardage back, like a 4th and 1 or a goal line or 3rd and 1, whatnot. And, if he improves his receiving skill coming out of the backfield, that can make him even more of an asset because then you can line him up in a lead blocker type role and then dump it off to him, kind of catch people sleeping that way. But I think initially he's going to be, a special teamer for us, which is fine. That's kind of what you expect out of, 5th round picks. But the development of Brian Hill, I think you're going to see fruits of that coming in the next few years, especially if they end up letting Coleman walk. So we'll see how that plays out. All right. On to our last 5th round pick, Eric Saubert, tight end out of Drake. He was picked number 174 in the 5th round. And I'm going to go ahead and call it. There ain't that many Drake football games on YouTube, so I haven't seen a ton about this guy. But he is, 6'4", 242 pounds, and was a productive pass catcher for Drake. 57 reception, or no, excuse me, 56 receptions for 776 yards last season, and 30 plus catches in all 4 of his seasons at Drake. So I mean, he's a pass catcher. Um, so that's worth taking note. He's not necessarily an inline blocker, but the Falcons right now are kind of set really for their number 1, number 2 tight end with Austin Hooper and Levine Toilolo. There you have your mainly pass catcher but decent blocker in Austin Hooper, and then your mainly blocker and decent pass catcher with Levine Toilolo. So you can kind of mix and match and have a little fun with those type, with that type of set, depending on who you throw to. But we saw, Shanahan do that last year, and I think Sarkisian, if he does what has been reported that he's going to do, sinking his teeth into all the plays that we ran last year in our playbook and stuff, then he should see the limited pass catching value of Levine Toilolo. And but if Toilolo keeps working on that stuff, maybe he can finally develop into that red zone threat that we've all said that a 6'8" tight end should be able to do. So they re-signed him to a 3-year, I think $12 million deal. So I hope he develops into more than just a blocking tight end. But the combination of Austin Hooper and Levine Toilolo means that Eric Saubert doesn't have to necessarily come in and do a ton right out the gate. I mean, he's got a battle with Joshua Perkins, for a spot. I mean, I don't know if this team's going to carry necessarily 4 tight ends, but it's been rumored that, apparently Sarkisian favors, 3 tight end sets. So, that may be your 3rd tight end. If he beats out, Joshua Perkins is a more reliable tight end, then maybe Perkins is your backup and, Saubert is your, 3rd tight end in your 3 tight end sets. So it'll be interesting to see how he gets used in this, especially this year, in this offense. But I've seen some people, compare him to almost like a poor man's Rob Gronkowski. I don't know. That's hard for me to compare anybody to one of the better tight ends in the league. I mean, it's like he's saying, oh, well, he's a poor man's Tony Gonzalez. I mean, what does that really mean? I mean, I think that's doing the kid a disservice, by trying to compare him to some of the greater tight ends. I would see that kind of comparison with, OJ Howard, who went the first round to the Bucks. If you're going to go first round and be a tight end, then you better be a damn good tight end. So, but that's that's my feelings on this draft, and that's going to kind of wrap up my post draft coverage. I mean, I hope y'all have enjoyed it, but ultimately, I feel like other than Takk McKinley, I feel like this year's draft was more about shoring up depth and making sure that we got depth for years to come. And if some of them develop into more than just depth, then that's fine. I mean, I expect some things out of Takk McKinley and Duke Riley. Past that, I don't really expect a ton per se out of this group. I expect them to be solid backups and solid contributors and potentially solid special teamers. But hey man, if some of them develop, then that's great. That's what that's what you try to draft them for, is to to get that potential diamond in the rough. But like I said before, that's gonna do it for me on this draft coverage. I think as we go into the next few weeks, you may see my coverage might tail off a little bit. Well, we got OTAs coming up, and we got camp coming up, and there's still some other things to dive into. But like I've been saying the last couple videos, go check out the other channel. It's listed as Pound for Pound. Check that out on YouTube. That's me and Toby D's collaboration channel, where we'll be posting most all of our videos and the videos that we do together. You can find my stuff on Falcon Eye View, but definitely keep an eye on that pound for pound, because that's where it's going to be at. That's where, the vast majority of my stuff's going to be posted. If you want to download the podcast that I do with Toby, that's on iTunes. Just search Pound for Pound. You should be able to find it. It's pretty simple. We got 3 episodes up right now. Be adding more as we do them. Just trying to give you all the ability to, listen to us however, whenever, wherever, kind of thing. So I appreciate y'all tuning in, and have a good night.